Welcome to the joint meeting of the El Cajon City Council Housing Authority and successor agency to the El Cajon Redevelopment Agency. The meeting is now called to order. I'd like to ask our city clerk to call the roll.
All council members present.
Would you please stand with me for the Pledge of Allegiance or remain standing for a brief moment of silence? And Belinda, would you mind leading us in the Pledge of Allegiance, please?
Certainly. Ready, begin.
Okay. Item 1.1 is the fiscal year 2017-2018 preliminary annual budget. Doug, would you please explain this to us?
I sure would. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Members of the City Council, welcome to our annual budget workshop. In 2 weeks, we will have a resolution for the City Council to adopt the proposed 17-18 budget and ask any additional questions at that time. I will start off with the four basic goals that staff and the City Council established a few years ago now, but we still think they're very apropos philosophically of how we look at the budget and what we're trying to accomplish. First of all, to be careful and conservative in our fiscal approach to this city and in budgeting. That's been a great thing to say over the past years. This is the first year that I think we're all going to be able to realize as we get further into this discussion, we're very glad we've taken this approach up until this time. Second, as Councilmember Mayor Pro Tem McClellan often reminds us, the original and still the most important reason for local government to exist is to protect our citizens, protect this city in emergencies and unforeseen circumstances. We often think of that as the day-to-day work of our outstanding police and fire departments, but it really extends citywide to our Public Works Department, our Building Division, and all the other teams that unify together in the city to protect. Understanding the changing nature of our economy, usually it's easy enough to say you have recessions and then you have boom periods, and we certainly had our recession a few years ago. But there's been so much national and statewide and even local commentary since that recession ended about 7 years ago that this comeback period has been unlike any comeback period in recent American history. It hasn't been a boom. We've never had a boom since 2011. It's been a slow creep. It's been an upward creep. The stock market's come back. Jobs have come back. Other things, retail sales that we're particularly sensitive to have come back. But it's been very, very slow. But it does continue, and particularly with retail sales, and again, Clay Shane in the second half of this discussion will be showing you some of the specific numbers, but it's the single most important funding for this city, whether it be the standard so-called Bradley Burns 1 cent or whether it be Proposition J, the additional ½ cent. So as sales tax go in the United States and in California, so does El Cajon. It's always something we're really focused on. And fourth and fifth, despite the financial challenges that we will be discussing here in just the next few moments, we always, and I know the City Council always attempts to be progressive and ambitious. This is what cities are for. I think the county does a good job in the unincorporated area, but there is a difference in cities. You obviously have a local city council that understands the streets. You are neighbors to 100,000 people. There is a local staff that has experience here. There is the ability to work on specific and very local issues that you really lose out in the unincorporated area. And the council often brings these things to staff and the community's attention. There's any number of things in this year's budget that also get at that issue. So those are the four basic goals. Each matter that I talk about in the next 10 minutes or 15 minutes is going to be a direct implementation of one of these goals. First, the careful and conservative part regarding fiscal characteristics, fiscal stability of this city. We've always been able to bring a balanced budget to this City Council, and we do again this year. But as you read in my budget memo from last week, this time it has an asterisk. And it has an asterisk because the only way we can bring a balanced budget to you in fiscal year 17-18, the one that's about to get started, is by using what we expect to be about $1.5 million of reserves that we're going to accrue in this current fiscal year. That's not the way we want to do it, but that's the way this time we find we must do it. Many, many years ago, the City Council, and this is true with a lot of City Councils, adopted a 20% operating reserve by resolution. That's 20% of all general funds, so that's going to total about $14 million. That's for true emergencies. Emergencies aren't always recessions. We know recessions are coming in the future. Emergencies are not when we have a new project we want to do. Somebody's asked me in the past, well, what is a true emergency of something that realistically could happen? And I'll tell you, 6.5 earthquake in the East County, the 50-year-old building next door is rendered by our building inspectors tell me we have to strengthen it. It's going to take 1 year. We have to move City Hall within the next few weeks and open up City Hall in a completely different place. That will cost us millions of dollars, and who knows what else around the city we would need to do. That's an emergency, and no city should be caught unawares of something like that. The next two items, I will leave more to Clay Shane in a moment, talking about the PERS reserve and the economic uncertainty reserve. I will say these are two items that we started working on with the City Council, I guess about 5 or 5.5 years ago now. I'm certainly glad we did. We didn't know quite the PERS situation was going to get to this level this quickly, but we knew something was coming. And these two reserves, which have millions of dollars in them, due to the conservative nature of budgeting over the last 5 years, is something that Clay will be able to show you more details on. Contracting over the past couple of years, actually going all the way back to the June 2012 election that the City Council put on the ballot to turn El Cajon into a charter city. One of the primary reasons the City Council did that was to enable this city to legally do more contracting. Since that time, as the Council is aware, we've done 2 major contracting efforts. Both of them have been very successful. About 1.5 to 2 years ago, the janitorial staff, and more recently, EMS for the paramedic services. This is a trend which is growing throughout the state of California for the same reasons El Cajon is looking at it. It is a good way to do business, and I can tell you the next contracting opportunity, which I'm not at liberty to talk about publicly yet, but I will be able to bring something to you this summer, I believe by the month of August, for the third significant contracting opportunity. Economic development, when we talk about that in the context of the city, we are normally talking about private development projects that you don't really see those in our budget because they're private development projects. You will see the result if they're retail projects like a car dealership. But the reason we've had for a few years the $300,000 fund, and often we don't spend all of that so it rolls over, is when we are doing deals out in the marketplace. As the council, I think, remembers, we've had a tax sharing deal with BMW, one with Honda. If you go back many years, one with Kia, one with Toyota. Those have sunsetted since then. One with the Marriott Hotel about ready to open, and there may be others in the future. Our portion of those come out of this $300,000 budget item if needed. Also, as the council is very aware, and you're going to see a lot of things in this presentation that we've discussed several times in the past year. This is the former police site, which we still own, is for the Hilton Hampton. That will be before the City Council in a public hearing for final approval July 11th, just slightly less than 1 month away. It's going to the Planning Commission first, and I expect construction in 2018. The next 2 items we've probably talked a little bit less about recently, but in years past we've emphasized these more. The council adopted a really big new housing element about 4 years ago now. Now comes the big second phase, which is the actual zone changes to implement that housing element. Some of that's been in front of council. There's a bigger part that is going to Planning Commission and then the City Council this coming year. And we are continuing to try to partner with MTS. They have some land that's available for development out at the Transit Center. We think it's a great opportunity for this city in economic development. Back to public safety. 2 of the most important things in the budget this year that I want to point the council's attention to is first, 3 positions for a truly innovative and first ever for the city of El Cajon. First responder resources, I want to thank Chief Stoll for working on this with us and for having the great ideas of how to make this work. This will be not in a big traditional fire engine, but in a specially outfitted truck to try to take the edge off the increasing number of first responder calls that may not need the full fire truck after that. This is the first time we've done this. We think it's going to be extremely successful in making our community much safer and for our fire department, our employees, much more efficient and workable than what it currently is. 3 additional, effectively, police department positions. We are proposing the actual addition in the budget of a new sergeant and a new police officer. And since one of our sergeants is full-time, the manager of the animal shelter, we are proposing to replace that with a civil position and then transfer that police sergeant full-time back into active police duty for a net increase of 3 full-time police positions. The police chief and fire chief are both here to answer any more specific questions you may have about the use of those positions. We recently had a large meeting about Wells Park, and one of the aspects about that, as you might remember, was the security gate at Wells Park. We're actually proposing now security gates for all of our parks in the city, and there's proposed budgeting in there for that. Traffic calming project in conjunction with Cajon Valley High School. That's a signal plus other traffic calming strategies right out there in front of the school. It's always been kind of a difficult situation of having so many kids at the beginning and end of day walking across streets, sometimes at an uncontrolled situation. The school's done a very good job at making that as safe as they can, but quite a while ago the city and the school district sat down and put our heads together to see if we could do something better for that, and we think we can. The next item, safe routes to schools. I know you've all heard of this, but this is a little bit different. Usually that means building a sidewalk, and we do have more sidewalks and ADA ramps in our budget citywide, but this is actually something different. This is a particular grant, and it's for education of school kids and parents, and this is really trying to also get at immigrant community that may not be as used to some of these ideas as others may be, to make the children's walk and the parents' walk to our various schools in the Cajon Valley Union School District, our elementary school district, as safe as it possibly can be. Finally, the next major thing, this will be the first full year of our homeless outreach team. This was approved by the City Council last autumn, and it's gotten going in our police department's work with the county sheriff, but this will be the first full year for that. Along with public safety, I think what cities are most known for is public infrastructure, and I always say it's easy to build stuff. Maintaining them is the hard part and the expensive part, and it lasts forever. So this is just the top 7 or 8. There are any number of smaller but still very important capital improvement items in this year's budget. Happy to talk about any one you may wish, either now or in 2 weeks. Animal control facility, as you know, we just had our groundbreaking a couple of weeks ago. That should be open and done, ready for business in about a year. Street repaving, I always like putting this up because while it doesn't get a lot of headlines, I think it's safe to say that if you look at individual programs or individual projects in the last 15 years or so, I don't think this city council spent more money on any one thing other than more than street repaving. We try to do one summary a year, and we're due for a summary this autumn of what we've done in the past, what the council's got going presently in this year's budget, and what we're looking at for the future. The bottom line is to completely repave every single street in this city, and then once you're finished the last one, to start all over again. That's an extremely expensive thing to do. We got a lot of help from Transnet, half-cent sales tax at the county level, but we have a very aggressive program. It's been very successful. What's that? Storm drain rehabilitation up in Fletcher Hills. I only put this because it happens to be a really big one. We have smaller sewer and stormwater replacement projects every year. This is about $1.5 million. Drains several neighborhoods up in the Fletcher Hills area. I mentioned just a moment ago citywide pedestrian ADA improvements. The ADA improvements are usually the curb cuts at the corners, and we continue to get to 100% closer and closer every year with those. The council is very familiar, I think, with Johnson Avenue Sewer Project. We're into Phase 2. It's a big phase, over $5 million. It's going to take about another year to complete that. But this is a 50-year-old major trunk line that sewer drains a big part of this city. It was absolutely necessary to replace it. The state has helped us financially with this, which is great. They don't help us with a lot, but they helped us with this. And so this comes from our wastewater funds. Just a couple of months ago, I think it was in the spring, City Council approved the latest phase of LED street lighting, streetlight retrofit program. We will have another phase, we believe, this next fiscal year, and that might be our last phase. That might completely finish the city or really close to it. This is a project we got started about 3 years ago now. Washington Chase, this is along both streets. Signal upgrades, this usually means interconnecting, better computer, better software. This is all about making the traffic as efficient and not hitting as few red lights as we possibly can. So those are the heavy city stuff, but we got some great other things going on, as we know, under the heading of recreation, culture, and public events, and these are the things that so often our citizens are physically involved in more than some of the other things. So let's start. I'll do a brief update on ECPAC. Last time I was with you was a few months ago now, and to introduce the Live Nation and the fact that we are in a negotiation with them. I can report all good news. Those negotiations, I think, are getting very close to being consummated. Live Nation and their folks are down here recently, almost weekly, inside ECPAC building. They literally have measuring tapes out, and they're looking at the chairs and which ones are replacing. They're down to that level of detail. And so this is looking very good. I expect success with that, knock on the wood. But everything is looking good. And as soon as we can, I will bring a draft proposal, draft deal back to the City Council. Wells Park, I think you know everything about that. I won't repeat everything that was said a couple of weeks ago. Stoney's Neighborhood Park, that is the new name that Council assigned to the kids' park next to Reagan, in between Reagan and the library. We've got additional improvements now beyond the Kaboom play set out there. We're going to have a overhead shade structure for the kids and their parents, because it does get a little toasty out there in the summer, and some landscaping and some other things that we didn't have a chance to finish the first time. And then on down the list, the major and incredibly successful public events that we have. We also should add the 4th of July, which is coming up. And in downtown, we've seen in the past year about 200,000 people per year. That will conclude the fun stuff. Now, the Director of Finance is going to walk up here with all the tables and charts and all that stuff that I know you're really looking forward to. But he will be going over the important financial details and from a numbers standpoint, what is in the budget. What I just showed you goes back to that old cliche, if you want to know what's important to somebody, look at their checkbook. Well, that's a highlight of your proposed checkbook for the next year. And when Clay is done, I'm going to come back here for a few concluding remarks based on some of the challenges that Clay is going to get into some detail. Clay, it's all yours.
Clay, don't let him talk to you that way. We think what you do is very interesting.
I thought my half was the fun part.
Yeah. See, there you go.
Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor, honorable council members, members of the public, city staff. Thank you for being here today. My name is Clay Shane. I'm the Director of Finance for the City of El Cajon. To get us going, I'd like to first put in perspective what today's meeting, how it fits into the overall budget process. Today's special session is to introduce the budget to the City Council and members of the public. At our next regular City Council meeting on June 27th, we will conduct our public hearings and then finalize and adopt the budget. The fun half of the presentation, I'll briefly cover the economy as well as some of our challenges at the citywide level throughout the presentation. We'll also briefly give you an overview on the city budget, as well as look into a little more detail on the general fund, the wastewater fund, briefly touch on some of the other funds we have in the city, as well as a summary of our CIP program. As Doug commented, our current economy kind of bumps along for the last several years, more or less the same story. In fact, this is the exact same slide I presented to you last year with no edits to it. And frankly, my notes are very similar to last year as One of our primary ways of measuring the economy is through gross domestic product, and we've more or less maintained an annual growth rate between 2 and 3%, which is very healthy, but it's not a blockbuster economy. Similarly, inflation creeps along at a relatively modest 2% over the last 12 months, and this has triggered the Federal Open Market Committee to raise the federal funds rate on a couple of times over the last 12 months, and most economists believe that they'll continue to do so for the next few years. Unemployment is improving regularly. Currently, or at least as of April, the national unemployment rate is 4.4%, with the state slightly higher. Home prices continue to increase, both within the San Diego market as well as the national market. And these all indicate slow and steady growth. The fiscal year 2018 budget, the budget we're looking at adopting for next fiscal year, comprises of many parts. It's a total spending plan of approximately $156 million. There are several major components of that. First and foremost is the general fund. The general fund is the city's primary operating fund, and that's where we have our public safety services, recreation, things like that, and it'll be the primary focus of our presentation today. However, we'll briefly touch on the special revenue funds, the wastewater enterprise fund, the internal service funds, as well as the capital project funds. So starting us off with the general fund, I thought it would be a good idea to give us an idea of where we're expecting to end the current fiscal year 17. We're anticipating revenues coming in totaling $67.8 million at fiscal year end. This is 0.2% over budget. Pretty good shooting if I don't say so myself. This is actually a 2.2% decrease from the previous fiscal year 16. That's not so much a story of fiscal year 17 as it is some of the events that happened in 16. A couple of primary things that caused that change was in fiscal year 16, we received the final payment for the 100 Fletcher property when we transferred the property from the city to the successor agency. And it was also a one-time bump in sales tax revenue as a result of winding down the triple flip. For those of you not familiar with the triple flip, it was a state-mandated revenue swapping scheme that benefited cash flow for the state. It was implemented in 2004 and just expired. On the expenditure side, we expect fiscal year 17 expenditures to total $66.1 million. This is right at $2 million under budget due to conservative spending throughout the general fund. This is actually a 4.2% increase from the previous fiscal year 16. About half of that increase is directly attributable to CalPERS, which will be a theme that you hear throughout today's presentation. All of this activity taken together, we're anticipating a growth in our fund balance in the general fund of $1.7 million from this current year's activity. So changing gears briefly to the general fund FY18 expenditure budget, we're anticipating growth from $68.2 million to $71.2 million. Now, this presents by category, and you'll see a lot of changes from year to year in categories. And a lot of that is due to some organizational changes we've made in how we record our expenses and how we present them. However, when it comes to the bottom line number, which is like what I'd really like to focus on, there's two main components. The first is salary and benefit increases. And this is a little bit misleading, and I want to take a moment to explain this. This is not just raises for everybody. This is the end result of the additional positions we've added that Doug discussed earlier, workers' comp insurance, as well as the negotiated salary and benefit increases. But the big one, the elephant in the room, are the CalPERS contributions. There is no one single line item that grows more year to year than the amount of money we have to pay for CalPERS. In going from fiscal year 17 to 18, we're anticipating that growth to be approximately $1.5 million. So while we're on the subject, let's talk about CalPERS a little bit. CalPERS, or the California Public Employee Retirement System, is a state agency that is contracted with the city to administer our defined benefit pension plans, both of them, our safety plan and our miscellaneous plan. These plans cover the benefits paid to retirees, and they're funded primarily by investment earnings, which we'll talk about at great length, and just a rough number, approximately 2/3 of all benefits that are paid out are through investments, and the rest are covered by employee and employer contributions. Our two plans cover approximately 1,500 employees, both current and former, and the average benefit paid to retired safety plan members is just over $53,000, and the same for the miscellaneous plan is just over $23,000 a year. So, why are CalPERS contributions increasing? Well, there's a number of causes for that. A few years ago, we had some significant demographic and actuarial changes. The short story is people are living longer than CalPERS originally estimated. And that's a good thing, except for the fact they have to pay out benefits for a longer period of time and require more money to do so. Another significant increase is CalPERS investment performance. The whole premise of a pension plan is that you anticipate having to pay $1 in benefits in the future, and it's estimating how much money do you have to set aside today. In order to get to that $1 in the future, they're anticipating earning 7.5% investment returns year over year. Frankly, over the last few years, they've failed to do so, and that needs to be made up through employer contributions. That expected rate of return is also referred to as the discount rate. Now, we've had some significant news happen in the last few months regarding the discount rate. The CalPERS board has recently voted to reduce the discount rate from 7.5% to 7%. And that doesn't sound like a big change, but it really is. It's going to have a considerable impact to our unfunded liability. We do not have those numbers rolled into our current valuation, and they've adopted a staggered approach where they'll ease into that over the next few years. All those taken together, we can anticipate considerable increases in required contributions over the next few years. For example, in FY18, next year's budget, total CalPERS contributions are $15.1 million, and they increase roughly $2 to $2.5 million each year until we hit 2022, when contributions total $24.7 million. Just to put that in a little bit different context, in FY18, next year, we're anticipating CalPERS to consume approximately 19% of the general fund budget. By 2022, that number grows to almost 27%. That is a staggering impact on the budget. So now that we have the big picture taken into consideration, I'd like to spend a little bit of time talking about the revenue budget. We're anticipating to collect just shy of $70 million next year, 69.8 to be precise. This is a 2.9% increase from estimated 16-17 revenues, this year's revenues. Most of that is experienced through sales tax and property tax increases, which remain to be the primary funding sources for the city operations, or at least the general fund operations. Currently, those two categories comprise 76% of total revenues. And this is my favorite chart, and I know it's small and it's tough to read, but here's the important part. If that pie represents total general fund revenues, the blue is sales tax. Half of every dollar we spend is funded by sales tax. This is a wonderful thing in good economies, but we need to be cautious because that also means we're disproportionately hit by recession. The red, incidentally, is property tax, with every other revenue category making up the remaining approximate quarter. When you express this information in table form, we return to the totals increasing from $67.8 million to $69.8 million from year to year. And this is pretty evenly spread throughout the categories, with sales tax and property tax having the highest rates of growth. Sales tax are increasing just shy of 3%, and we anticipate property tax increasing in the neighborhood of 5% annually. Other increases are much more modest. On the expenditure side, I had expressed earlier when we were talking about the significant changes to the budget that there were a number of organizational changes we put in this year's budget. And you see that a little bit here, where you see the general government category decreasing a little bit, and you see police and fire increase. And these reorganizations compose a pretty significant change there. For example, about half of fire's growth is attributable to those changes, but PERS continues to be a big increase as well as the additional staff. And the story is approximately the same for police department. So where does that leave us? At the end of fiscal year 18, well, maybe it's better if we start at the beginning of fiscal year 17, the current year. We started fiscal year 17, the current fiscal year, with total fund balance in the general fund of approximately $35.5 million. Through the revenue and expenditure activity that I discussed just a moment ago, we're expecting to end fiscal year 17 $1.7 million better at $37.2 million. And that's where we start fiscal year 18. And through the anticipated activity in 18 and using that surplus from 17, we pretty much end up right back where we started at the end of 17. So if you notice the relationship between 17 and 18, you'll see how these flow through. 35.5 to start 17, 67.8 in revenue, 66.1 in expense, ending the current year at 37.2, and then moving on through the 18 activity to end at $35.7 million. When we look at that number and we break it into reserves, we'll see that, as Doug mentioned, the operating reserve, the 20% reserve, is anticipated to total, excuse me, $14.3 million at year end. The other categories of reserves include the carryover reserve, which is $8.4 million. But we should consider renaming that. That fund historically has been the surplus that is collected over the last few years, last few good years. Knowing the challenges we have ahead of us, we probably should keep in mind that that is not extra money. That's money we are going to have to leverage moving forward to maintain services as well as balance the budget. We still have a significant amount of money set aside in the PERS fund. If you recall, in October of last year, we assigned a considerable amount of fund balance at that time to both the PERS reserves and the economic uncertainty reserve. The result, of course, has been that we've used a little bit of it in fiscal year 18 to balance the budget, but we still have money there for that purpose. And also the designated for economic uncertainty is there to weather the storm of the next recession. But that's how your $35.7 million of general fund balance breaks down. Now I'd like to change gears and discuss the wastewater enterprise fund. As you know, this fund is our wastewater fund. It's funded by sewer rate fees paid by our constituents. These monies directly are restricted to the operation of this fund. It started the year with $13.7 million in total fund balance, anticipating to collect an additional $19 million through fiscal year 18, anticipating operating expenditures of $20 million, and capital expenditures of $11.3. And we're anticipating ending fund balance of approximately $1.6 million in the wastewater fund. Now, that looks like a pretty big decrease from year to year there, but we don't need to be alarmed with that. As part of our rate-setting structure, we collect fees for capital projects often in advance of actually spending them. So you'll see these fluctuations from year to year occasionally as a result of capital activity. Moving on to our special revenue funds. These are funds that have a unique funding source that are restricted for a specific purpose. I don't want to spend a lot of time on these because there's a multitude of control activities restricting our use of this money. There's very little control we have over how this money is spent. Our biggest is our low and moderate income housing fund, or our housing authority fund, with approximately $3.9 million, followed by our street maintenance fund, or our gas tax fund. We're anticipating 2.5 of activity and $2.5 million worth of activity in fiscal year 18. Our collective federal, state, and local grants at $1.4 million, CDBG $1.3 million, and our recreation department's special programs fund. And those of you, this is the first time that the rec fund has appeared on this chart, my top five, and this is the fund that collects its money through the fees charged for their classes and programs, and those fees go back into funding those programs. We have a number of internal service funds. Internal service funds are funds that are supporting other city operations. The biggest and most notable is our IT Services Fund. Total expenditures in the IT Services Fund is $3.8 million. And here again, this is to support citywide IT services. Vehicle and equipment maintenance, we anticipate $2.7 million worth of activity next year. The Self-Insurance Fund, $1.7 million. Post-Employment Benefit Fund, $1.6 million. And vehicle and equipment replacement of just over $1 million. On the CIP program, I kind of feel like Doug took a little bit of wind out of my sails and highlighted some of the bigger projects we have, so I'll leave it at the summary level. Our total CIP program for fiscal year 18 is anticipated a total $34.4 million. That breaks down with approximately $10.6 million attributed to wastewater capital improvements, public safety, which is really the Prop O money, the additional sales tax for public safety facilities, at $10.1 million. Transportation, which are your street projects, ADA, pedestrian safety, things like that, just under $7 million next year. Facilities, $5.6 million, and parks, just under $1 million. And with that, that concludes my presentation. I'd like to hand back over to Doug for his concluding remarks.
Thank you, Clay. My concluding remarks really are this. For as long as I've been here, I've been able, with the council, to look forward to each budget year getting away from the recession to be better than the last one. For the most part, that's been true. Because of the PERS situation, and only because of the PERS situation, that's no longer true. And I have an obligation as city manager to inform the council and inform this community that it's not going to get better at any point in the foreseeable future. This city, as well as many other cities throughout the state of California, did everything they could coming out of the recession to pay all of their bills to PERS, to do future planning. And I can tell you that up until about a year and a half ago, this city had dropped its liability to PERS about $20 million. With the changes that Clay just reviewed, including bad performance on their own investment, that is boomeranged. It's gone up $20 million just in the last 18 months, and it's going to go further. This is an odd situation for us because there's really nothing we can do about it from a mega standpoint. Again, we pay our bills and that kind of thing. It has to do with PERS policy, which is really the state legislature and how the governor affects PERS. It has to do with how the economy will affect their profit margin or lack of profit margin. They have a huge investment portfolio, well over $300 billion, but a 0% of $300 billion is still zero, and that's what they've had for the last 2 years. As my budget memo said, and it makes me no joy to say this, this city, and I'll say again, we are not alone. We are kind of average in the state of California. We're not way above average. We're not way below average either. This city is going to be faced with some very difficult financial choices for the next many years. Some of those are going to be unpopular. Some of those I'm not even going to want to recommend, but I'm going to have to. Some of those you may not want to adopt, but I'm going to tell you, you're going to have to. We're going to have to relook at certain portions of this city in a different way than the way El Cajon has been run in the past. I gave a hint of that halfway through my earlier presentation with the concept of contracting. It's one of the biggest things we can do. Won't solve the problem, but it can certainly help. This city, in my opinion, is going to have to get much more aggressive than even what we've been so far in the area of contracting. And when you begin opening in that subject, well, I think the City Council and staff together have done a great job. We've done it with no layoffs. I'm not proposing that we change that. But we've left it to a couple things that seemed obvious and things that many other cities had done. I think we're getting into an era where we're going to have to consider contracting of things that are not obvious and things that no one has considered in the past. I don't have a proposal for you. I'm not prepared to talk about details, but I do want to set the table for what I believe is the near-term future. I'm not talking about a decade from now. I'm talking about over just the next couple of years. Myself, my entire staff, is looking at every single thing that happens, whether it be number of employees, what we pay those employees, programs that we do, whatever costs money, in light of PERS. I implore the City Council to do the same. That's my concluding remarks. We have a balanced budget. We have a good, solid budget. We've got a lot of great programs that we're proposing and projects, and I don't want any of my warning remarks to take away of how good I think this budget is and how much better this community is going to be 1 year from now than it is today, in conjunction with all the private development that, as I say, you don't really see in the budget. It's just happening out there that our staff works on. Every single year, this city gets better, and that's going to stay that way. But our role in keeping that momentum going is going to necessarily change in the next few years. Mr. Mayor, thank you for your time. Be happy to answer any questions. Clay and I will take whatever we can. We have a lot of folks here, and there's many who are not in the room. This is what it takes to put together an annual budget of an organization this size, $155 million, and we have any number of people that could perhaps answer detailed questions. I will remind you, you're not adopting anything today. This is just a discussion item. Yes. I'll bring back a resolution, full public hearing, 2 weeks from now. Any more? I think we have some public testimony coming up. Do we have any speakers here? Okay. Next time we probably will, as we typically do, and that would be the time we'd be asking the council to adopt a budget. Thank you. Mr. Mayor?
Before I take questions, I want to thank you, thank Clay, thank all our department heads. You know this, but I'm not sure the public understands that the department heads and all the employees and our leadership team work diligently on cutting expenses, increasing revenues, preventing the kind of problems that we're seeing coming from becoming real problems. And I hear how dire what you're saying is, but I got to give you credit that if we hadn't prepared in the way we prepared for the last several years, if not last decade, we wouldn't have all the time that we have to prepare for what's coming. So thank you for your prescience in giving us time to tackle this problem. Council, questions? Bob?
Yes, great presentation, by the way. I really appreciate the hard work that you put into it.
Thank you.
I know about 7 years ago, when we had our recession, I noticed, and I know that property tax and sales tax decreased by quite a percentage. And every 7 to 10 years, you have another recession. Mm-hmm. It's going to be on the horizon. I read the paper and watch the news, and there's two major, I know Parkway Plaza is a great source of sales tax revenue for our city. There's two major stakeholders that have announced decreasing earnings or losses, and one of them even mentioned that they may not be able to stay in business for the long period of time. Some of the shopping centers around the nation have closed, one of them being in Westfield. I can't remember the exact location, but I know that's a major source of our revenue, as well as the car dealers especially. And you know what happens to car dealers when we have a recession. Their sales drop from 25-30%, and that's a direct increase in the amount of revenue that we have to use, where we will not be able to use in our general fund. I think we need to be very, very careful about anything that we do in the future, because we're going to have another recession. I don't know when it'll come. I don't know how big it'll be, but we've had a pretty good level of growth, very slow over the last few years, but I don't remember the exact dollar amount that our sales tax decreased in the last recession. Could you give us an idea what it might have been?
Well, I can put it in today's, almost all cities during a recession, their sales tax goes down at least 25%, and if it's a particularly longer recession like the one we just had, closer to one-third. Our sales tax that you saw up there, our normal 1%, the Bradley Burns, is $25 million. Prop J, which is an additional half-cent sales tax, is $9.7 million proposed for this year. So you add those two, you're talking just gross terms, about $35 million. So you can do the math. If you do one-third of $35 million, you're losing about $11 to $12 million a year.
Plus the PERS increase that we're experiencing
Going the
and will
opposite
increase
direction.
for the next 5-6 years.
I know some may look at what appear to be very healthy, and again, we're glad we have them, of the fund balance, $35 million. Goes, oh, my goodness, they're just sitting on massive amounts of money. That money will not be here 5 or 6 years from now.
That's right.
It won't.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
More questions? Ben?
So is the overall revenue down off $6 million? Is that how I?
No. You mean proposed for this coming year?
Yeah.
No. You have between this year and next year. '17, we're expecting to bring in almost $68 million in revenue, and in this coming year, almost $70 million. So about a $2 million increase between this current year and next year.
More questions? I have a couple of questions. Clay mentioned in one of his slides that at some point in the future, I think it was in 21, we'd be looking at 20%, 28% of our general fund will go towards PERS. Is that the right figures?
27 of the general fund, yes, sir.
27%.
Yep.
Is that based upon the economy chugging along at its current rate, or is that based upon anticipated recession?
No, the former. It's based on the economy chugging along. If there is a recession with the results that I just mentioned to Mr. McClellan, then the percentage of PERS would go much higher.
So we're looking at 28% of the general fund if things were going well, and then you chop another 20% off the revenue to the general fund. That could be a pretty significant amount of our general fund, up to.
Well, not quite 20%. I said about 11 or 12. We're about 70 million now. It's a huge amount, but 20% would be something more than 14 million. So it's probably in the 15% range. But your basic point is absolutely correct.
And I don't want to put you on the spot, but would it be likely that we'll be expecting another recession? I think they come fiscally about every 10 years, right?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, we're not that far away from setting the all-time United States record for no recession. When the last one ended, and of course we understand that term recession is a technical term, economic slowdown is what most of us feel, and it lasts longer. But the technical recession ended in 2011. Here we are 6+ years later. If we go, I think it's just a couple more years, we'll break the all-time record for longest period in the United States without a recession. So I think most commentators believe that we're not within 12 months. After that, it gets a little hazy, but it can't possibly, it would seem from a historical standpoint, be as far away as 4 or 5 years.
So I don't want to put you on the spot today, but at some point I'd like to see a number in 2021 of what the general fund percentage going to CalPERS would be if we were in the midst of a typical recession.
We can do that.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Because I think we should prepare for what's real.
Yes, and it's also difficult to know what CalPERS would do. They have done, as Clay laid out, these incremental changes, almost one a year, the result of which is always the same. requiring more money from local governments and all of their members to put in their fund. And I understand why they're doing that. They want as much money in there so that they can invest, so they can make profits before we get to the recession. What is CalPERS going to do in a recession? I don't know. I really don't know. It seems inconceivable they won't do anything, because many, many, many cities in California are going to be far worse off than the city of El Cajon. I can assure you that. And one would hope that before we get to that situation, the state will adjust in some manner. But we can't predict, even, unfortunately, and I hate to say this, we can't even predict 12 months out what CalPERS is going to do next.
So you're talking about a bailout at some point.
That's one possibility. I have a personal opinion. I don't doubt the governor would agree with me, but I can read the numbers and I can add, and I don't see how the kind of mortgage that they've asked all the cities to pay, when you introduce one or two recessions over the next 20 years, it doesn't add up. And I personally think the state of California is going to need to intervene at some point. Not to pay off everything, that's completely unrealistic, but to take some edge off of it.
So perhaps to help with a smoothing plan?
Possibly. They have a smoothing plan now, it's just this, even the smoothing plan is killing us, so.
All right. That's the end of my questions. Thanks, both of you. I appreciate the honest talk. We can't make good decisions if we don't know what's coming.
Thank you very much.
Gary?
Yeah, one thing I want to point out, we also have another issue with the state. They've got state teachers' retirement plans that a lot of people are in.
Yes, they do.
That's not in the greatest shape either.
And they have their own employees,
Right.
which is a massive amount, and they're trying to pay down their own debt on that, too. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Thank you very much.
All right. Belinda, do we have any speaker cards on this item?
I have no cards for this item.
Okay, is there, we didn't have any speaker cards, but I do want to give the public an opportunity. If you'd like to speak on this matter only, we'll be having another council meeting in a few minutes, but if you'd like to speak on this matter, you may do so. Okay. Then, do I need to close the public hearing?
No, sir.
Okay. The public hearing for fiscal year 2017-2018 budget is listed on today's 3 o'clock agenda item under 3.1. The hearing, however, is being continued to the 3 o'clock p.m. meeting on June 27th, as noted on the agenda. And that brings us to the adjournment of the special joint meeting of the El Cajon City Council Housing Authority and successor agency to the El Cajon Redevelopment Agency, held this 13th day of June 2017. And we are adjourned until 3 o'clock, when we have our regularly scheduled meeting.